Hello indie game fans, indie games are back. After a 2-week lull, welcome to a ridiculously packed week of games with some certified bangers, beginning with Fallen Leaf, a throwback 8-bit pixel art action platformer that simply nails exactly what they are going for. This is Mega Man-like in nature in more ways than one, down to the jump animation of the characters, but interestingly has multiple playable characters, each with their own special abilities, so there is plenty of replayability, aided by the fact that you can choose which route to take in the overworld. This has been in development for a long time, which I believe has to do with the 70, yes, 70 number of stages in this game, so if you're a fan of the genre, this is one to get. A little bit of a disclaimer here, since the first-person PvPvE dungeon crawler Dungeonborne looks awesome and has a vibe similar to that of Korean-made Dark and Darker, with the kicker being that I cannot really find any information about developer Mithril Interactive. People are speculating that it is a Singaporean developer, or at least registered in Singapore, like the developer of The Day Before, probably due to tax reasons, and some people are saying that this studio is owned by Tencent, which, like Once Human and Starry Studio from last week, which is owned by NetEase, appears to be an active effort from Chinese tech giants to obscure their links to these developers. So make of that what you will, and it might not be an indie studio after all. Still, the game itself has been well received during the Steam Next Festival, with the variety of character classes and first-person combat proving to be fun, so perhaps give it a look this week. After a little bit of a delay from June, the physics-based action roguelite Galactic Glitch releases in early access this week, a pretty fun combat-focused title with the main gimmick of a gravity gun, which you can use to rip components off enemy ships, disabling their shields or slowing them down, and thereafter to use a wide variety of weapons to take them out. I played the demo and the action feels good, so I'm excited to dive into this one. Another long-awaited indie game makes it to release in SCHiM, a 3D platformer in which you play as a little frog creature that can only jump from shadow to shadow. The main thing that stands out in this game is the art style, of course, with some very bold use of colour, and is not a one-trick pony since there is quite the visual variety as well. Of course, the concept of jumping from shadow to shadow does evoke memories of playtime as a kid, as you let your mind wander when observing the natural world on those lazy summer afternoons, so its release this week is perfect. I'm curious about how many scenarios the developers have come up with, and if there are escalating levels of challenge like in a regular platformer, since from the trailer footage alone, it looks like you're doing the same thing over and over again, so let's see when this releases. Publisher Hooded Horse is absolutely crushing it with strategy games this year, with their next title of interest being Norland, a medieval colony sim that sure looks to be similar to RimWorld but in a very different time and place. You are leading a noble family as they exert their control over the kingdom, having to tend to the needs of your people or face uprising and the extermination of your clan. Of course, in a very Game of Thrones kind of way, threats emerge from all sides in terms of rival kingdoms, but also religious groups, treachery and backstabbing, and of course economic turmoil, with the indirect control and the unique personalities of characters being central to a game like this. If done well, the emergent stories will be the thing coming out of this game, and it appears to have all the necessary facets in place for its success. It's a big week of other games as well, so let's begin with Corsair's Madness, an action platformer with a nautical theme in which you play as a pirate captain who is shipwrecked on an archipelago with his crew missing, now having to explore, save his crew, and uncover the secrets of the land. The core platforming looks solid and has shoot 'em up inspired sequences on a boat as well, and there's also another playable character shown off, which is known as the Possessed. I believe this is the same protagonist but possessed by something, which gives him increased combat abilities and looks to be a good entry, although I'm not quite convinced that this is going to be the next Shovel Knight. Medieval-themed action sandbox titles are fairly popular, see Mordhau or Chivalry, Medieval Warfare for example, with another title dipping their toe into things being Crestfallen Medieval Survival. This is a third-person entry instead of first-person and has fantasy elements like dragons, but for the most part, it's an open-world sandbox RPG title in which you are building a castle, crafting weapons and armor, and then fighting other players for dominance. The multiplayer aspect is a concern since I don't know how active the player population would be, so let's see if there's an interesting enough solo experience, or maybe it will just become the next big thing. Here's a neat looking fighting game named Dojo Masters, one that has a simple but clean looking pixel art style in which practitioners of various martial arts face off to see who's the best, but it is not quite the UFC. According to the developer, this has inspiration from Karate Champ, which released on the NES in 1986, aiming to bring the simple but not simplistic design to the modern age, and has rolled back netcode as well, so you should be able to play online without issues, assuming that there are enough players searching for a match. Here's a fun-looking top-down action roguelite named Earl vs the Mutants, in which you are taking on hordes of mutants, with the twist being that you are driving around in different kinds of vehicles with weapons mounted on top. Additionally, there is terrain and elevation, so the act of moving around on the battlefield is different as compared to, say, Vampire Survivors for example, since you can jump over enemies. Driving into enemies will also cause damage, and you can drift and use physics to your advantage and looks like fun. Developer Toadman Interactive is an interesting one since they are out of Europe and have made titles like Block and Load, with their next game being the self-styled ultimate vampire power fantasy game EvilVEvil. This is a co-op first-person shooter where you can choose to play as different vampires, each with their own special abilities, as you take on a dangerous cult and its members. You can equip powerful artifacts to nudge your playstyle in one way or the other, with a nice variety of guns which you can modify as well, and I believe supports co-op for up to 3 players. I'm not sure what the structure of this game is, but previews of the game indicates that it has a mission-based structure, so maybe Left 4 Dead-like in nature, although there is persistent progression and leveling up as you push through the game. Okay, the reason why I'm sighing is not because Flintlock The Siege of Dawn looks bad, but rather because they use the term Souls-light to describe the game, adding to the convoluted way that we talk about games, see roguelite versus roguelike for example, but as far as I can tell, this is a third-person action game with deliberate combat. It has a cool mythical setting of mashing together gods and guns, where you must defeat said gods and their forces in order to close the door to the great below and reclaim your world. This comes to us from the developer of SCHiM, so I'm definitely interested in this since that was a cool, weird game on its own, and this looks quite interesting. Developer Hollow Ponds and Richard Hogg have a signature art style, and you can almost identify their games from a distance since they have similar, exaggerated, cartoony features, and their next game is Flock, a multiplayer co-op title about flying around the world and collecting adorable flying creatures in, well, your flock. You are attempting to seek out rare creatures to add to said flock, being more about flying around and exploration, and has co-op support so that you can hang out with your friends over chat as you go about your way. As such, it looks like a pretty chill, almost meditative experience with an awesome visual style as well. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this game, but let's go with Kiopioke, a pixel art puzzle platformer in which you play as a bird who has to make it past hazards and traps to get to the next level. Of course, the bird has a broken wing, which explains why it cannot fly, and I love it when developers bother to explain why, with the platforming looking devious in parts and will be for fans of the genre. Here's another cozy game worth a look named Magical Delicacy, a side-scrolling exploration platformer in which you own a shop and have to explore to gather ingredients, cook meals, and then deliver it to the various townsfolk as you make new friends in a new town. Interestingly, the developer, at least on Twitter, describes this as a Metroidvania, but as far as I know, there isn't any combat, although they do talk about getting new abilities to get to new areas, as well as unlocking shortcuts for easier backtracking. The pixel art looks nice, although the platforming appears to be a little floaty, so let's see how this controls, although that shouldn't matter as much if timing isn't an issue. Here's a title that I have my eye on since Mech Builder does look kind of nice, being essentially a gunpla builder in which you are fixing up model robots and looks nice, without costing an exorbitant amount as the hobby. However, apparently, the developer has used generative AI in this game, but trained the models on his own drawings or something, so I don't know if you personally would have any issue with this, but it was highlighted to me, so I thought I should bring it up. For some reason, we have a sudden influx of rally racing games, and such is the case with old school rally as well. One that has a throwback visual style that would not be out of place in arcades, in which you are racing on various tracks across the world. It is not really my kind of game, since I mostly played beat-em-ups, run-and-gun titles, fighting games, and vertical shoot-em-ups in arcades, but if it is your jam, do give this a look. A game that looks like pure chaos is OutRage Fight Fest, a multiplayer brawler in which up to 16 players can duke it out for supremacy across a wide variety of game modes. The gimmick here is that the more rage you build up, the larger your character gets physically, which then unlocks new moves and abilities, such as being able to pick up and throw cars. There are also different game modes like an area capture conquest style mode, as well as capture the flag, and looks like fun with friends. Just a quick one here in Riviera The Promised Land, a HD remake of a game from the GBA, which is a system that I'm a fan of, but for some reason, I've not heard about this, where this is a turn-based RPG drawing upon Norse mythology with angels and demons and all that jazz, and might be worth a look given that its Metacritic rating is 76. A neat-looking cyberpunk action title is Shell Runner, a self-styled single-player PvE extraction shooter, but one that sure sounds like a roguelite to me, since you are controlling randomly generated humanoid shells to dive into missions to get loot and credits, but lose it all if you die. While it plays in real time, the developers describe it as a tactical shooter, so there must be some sort of strategy to your approach and might be interesting. Another curiosity of the week is Space Prison, in which you are a prisoner and have to find a way to survive, having to make allies and alliances with other prisoners while you find a way to escape. This is done through turn-based combat, which appears to have a tactical component to it since units are on a grid, but outside of combat, you can craft, equip and conceal items, upgrade your prison cell, tame space rats, and even build relationships with the other prisoners, working your way up the hierarchy to become boss. And if you die, you get reborn in a new body, so maybe there is some roguelite here as well. I love indie games because of games like this, since just listen to its description. Sparedevil is an arcade FPS with the graphic charm of classic 90s bowling alley animations, so if that doesn't get to you, I don't know what will, since it is just a fascinating idea for an indie game which I'm surprised has not been done before. On top of the visuals, we are also wielding a bowling ball as a weapon, so that sure sounds like fun, looking to be a wacky, crazy experience, and the arcade nature of the game probably means that this is more like Devil Daggers in nature, in having to survive and to get the high score, and is the hidden gem of the week. If you love city builder games, the Crust looks like a well-made one of these, in which you are building up an automated lunar base, and interestingly, is narratively driven, so there is a whole story aspect to it. City builders with this focus are always an interesting concept, since there is a definitive end to the main game, and while it usually opens up into a sandbox later on, while it still lasts, could be of interest. Here's a roguelite deck builder with a fantastic art style named Union of Gnomes, in which fairy tale characters have become slavers and are exploiting the gnomes, the head of which is Snow White herself. So your party of gnomes rises in revolt. Interestingly, you pick a hero gnome character which forms the foundation of your strategy for the run, and then every additional gnome in your caravan can then be played like cards, from using a bard, a voodoo gnome, one that is just named OK Boomer, which causes damage and so on. I love the art style in this game, and there are permanent upgrades to your heroes between runs and looks excellent as well.
No orders.
A 1.0 release of interest this week would be USC Counterforce, a turn-based tactics title that is inspired by XCOM, but more of the original UFO defense games rather than the modern Vorax's releases. You are defending humanity against aliens, commanding a strike team of commandos after a colony went dark. The full release includes the complete campaign mode, which has multiple endings for maximum replayability. The developers of Vampire Therapist cite What We Do in the Shadows, so of course I'm interested, being a visual novel title in which you play as a Wild West cowboy vampire, which, faced with immortality, takes to therapy to figure out what he wants to do with the rest of his immortal life and how to get better. He partners with a 3,000-year-old vampire to talk things through, and thus encounter a whole host of vampires from other historical time periods as well, with the voice acting in this being excellent, so if you love narrative games, this will be of interest.
I warned them. This would all turn to shit.
Here's a game which is kind of weird, since Vorax is a self-described open-world survival horror game, so conceptually that is an interesting frame, but on a more meta level, it is from developer Indie Gala, yes, the indie bundle people, where I did not know that they made games, so chalk it up as a curiosity. This one's for indie game developers. The free indie game marketing resources are ready, so sign up via the link in the description below to get it in your mailbox. That was a massive list so far, but wait, there's more, since the top 5 begins with Dungeons of Hindenburg, a game which encourages you to book your slaycation with them, which honestly wasn't the vibe I was expecting from this game, since it looks like one part cozy game and one part action-adventure game to me. Our heroine is exploring a beautiful alpine village in, presumably, some nondescript European country inspired by Switzerland or Austria or something, being able to meet the locals in town, get to know them, learn from them and more, but then there are also dungeons to explore. You traverse around on a snowboard, zipline, minecart and more, and exploration looks fun, with combat looking intense as well. Also having puzzles, so there's a little bit of everything, wrapped up with a gorgeous visual style. The top 5 is excellent if I do say so myself, so make sure you watch till the end, where we have the long-awaited release of Meifu Mado in this spot. This is a pixel art action-adventure RPG set in a post-apocalyptic world that is inspired by Japan, in which our hero explores and attempts to survive. There isn't too much in terms of details and gameplay mechanics stated on the Steam page, so that is all I have to go on, but the game was successfully kickstarted but then ran into trouble getting the funds out, which might have affected development and the scope of this game, since what was shown off earlier doesn't appear to be in current screenshots and trailer, so do be cautious on this one, but as always, I hope that this is good and wish the developer all the best. speaking of long anticipated titles, Gestalt, Steam and Cinder finally makes it to launch, I think. This is after being delayed multiple times and then most recently from May to July, so this is it, I suppose, where if it somehow gets delayed once again, then I have nothing more to say. This is a steampunk Metroidvania with a gorgeous pixel art style coming to us from one of the most talented pixel artists that I have come across, with what appears to be a fun variety of biomes, enemies, bosses and more. There is a mini skill tree in terms of progression, and there are more RPG elements like stats, and seems to be taking inspiration from games like Symphony of the Night, which I'm not complaining, so fingers crossed this is great. A dark horse pick of the week is Yaoling Mythical Journey, an auto-battler RPG in which you are capturing these creatures, placing them in your party, and then sending them into battle Pokemon style, but as an entire army, and combat is not turn-based, but rather auto-battler combat. As such, formation, troop placement and composition will matter a lot more, with the main narrative hook being to explore the world to face off against other Yaoling keepers and their respective schools. All the elements are here, including monster evolution and even shinies, with there being an extensive base building element as you build up your village as well, where the Yaoling are able to help in the construction and even tasks like farming, so it is Pale World-like in nature as well, and could be something special. Hand-drawn, Japanese-inspired Metroidvania drawing upon Hollow Knight and Ori. That is the elevator pitch for Bow Path of the Teal Lotus, a game which I've been banging on and on about, and it will finally release this week, being one of my most anticipated Metroidvanias, and it looks awesome, so I hope this release is great. Watch this video for more upcoming games for the rest of 2024.